Our panel discussion on the occasion of International Mother and Father Language Day. We're here in Manchester in Central Library in a hybrid format with a few people who have joined us here in this big room and some people who have joined us online. As we understand, I for one am still getting used to this hybridity and it feels a bit odd, but we will carry on nonetheless. We're here tonight to talk about what it's like to be a city of languages and what are some of the implications for practice and policy. It is my honor and pleasure to moderate this evening's discussion. My name is Yaron Matras. I was professor of linguistics at the University of Manchester for many years, where I set up the Multilingual Manchester project and was the co-initiator of Manchester's International Mother Language Day celebrations back in 2017 and have been involved in those celebrations since. I'm also the author of some of the research on Manchester's language diversity, which is often cited in one form or another in many of the public communications on Language Day. And I am co-founder of a new initiative called Manchester City of Languages. This is a civic partnership that aims to bring together individuals, families, organizations to engage with multilingualism, to talk about issues and responsibilities and see if we can offer local and global solutions, and also engage with other multilingual cities internationally. We're building on the legacy of Multilingual Manchester, which has had considerable impact on the recognition of multilingualism in the city. And our current projects include activities with local schools, with local community centers, as well as a large-scale project in partnership with Manchester Museum, which is being funded by National Lottery Heritage Fund. And this is a project that will expand digital volunteering around engagement with an online multilingual museum platform. We'll soon be launching our website, and we invite you to contact us via our website. And in the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter at City of Languages. I'd like to thank, first of all, Manchester City Council and Manchester City of Literature Initiative, which is supporting the organization of this event, and Manchester Libraries for offering us this venue. And I'll introduce our panelists for this evening. Becky Swain is Director of Manchester Poetry Library at Manchester Metropolitan University. Councillor Lutfur Rahman is Deputy Leader of Manchester City Council and Councillor for Rashom. Afzal Khan is Member of Parliament for Manchester Gorton, joining us from the Houses of Parliament in London. And Dr. Maaike Ferrips is Director of the company The Taal Studio, or Language Studio, joining us from Amsterdam. Welcome to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. The format will be like this. We'll have two rounds of brief statements from the panelists in response to some questions that I will put. And then an opportunity for the panelists to comment on each other's statements, and then we can take, in the time that remains, questions from participants. Are we also set up for taking questions from online participants? Just locally here in the room, I'm afraid. Well, you can find a way to send us questions or address the participants then in another. Send them on Twitter with some tag. Give me a hashtag. MCRIMLD22. Send to us. Okay, send to whatever it's called, at City of Languages, and hopefully we'll find it, so I'm relying on you now. Well, anyway, we'll do our best with that. Becky Swain, the Manchester Poetry Library has just recently been launched at the Manchester Metropolitan University, and the website says that it hosts an extensive range of poetry in the many languages that are spoken in Manchester. What's the vision? Is this the first such initiative to embrace the city's multilingualism? What is the concept, and what impact do you expect that it'll have on the city?
Thank Sharon, that's a great question. So Manchester Poetry Library at Manchester Met opened in September. We've been virtual for the last 2 years, and when it says an extensive range of languages, it's growing. So we have about 1,200 books of poetry in different languages, and the main concept is, bearing in mind we are the most language-rich city potentially in Europe, potentially beyond, we wanted to reflect that in a new poetry collection. There are so many museums, Manchester Museum, for example, looking at decolonising historical collections, and to start a new collection from scratch, we felt that building an inclusive collection from the ground up was most important. And when I say a concept, we're being very intentional about wanting to develop the languages most spoken in Manchester first. So within the first 3 years, Chinese, Polish, Arabic, Urdu, and then other languages will follow. And we had funding from the Granada Foundation in the first 2 years to develop the first 5 languages. And we do that in different ways. Every language is different. Every connection and development and co-curation is different. With the Chinese community, we started with a festival. And then the poet Jennifer Lee Tsai, always with a bilingual poet, we start to develop a collection that then connects with a community who choose what books come into the collection. And you ask, is it new? It's not new in terms of multilingual initiatives in Manchester. I think there are many multilingual initiatives, including the Multilingual Museum, the Made in Manchester poem, this celebration for International Mother Language Day. But in terms of a focus on poetry, there are other poetry libraries, national poetry libraries in Scotland and London. But very much they look at poetry in translation, not necessarily a place where you will only find a book in Urdu. So it's not always in relation to English. And many public libraries find that sometimes when books are chosen from a catalogue, they just stay on the shelves. So our aim is to make sure that those books are well used. And what do we want as an impact? We think that poetry helps us understand what it means to be human. We think it connects people. It builds bridges across generations. You can see that from projects Mother Tongue, Other Tongue, Made in Manchester, where we connect with public libraries and the council to develop over 70 verses now of that poem. So I think there's something about cultural understanding we want to develop at a time when communities, since 2016, since the kind of Leave and Remain votes, I think instances of racism and negativity towards communities has risen. So it is an urgent thing. It's not something that is an extra that we need to have.
Yes, I think just on that note, language is something that is often seen as a barrier, isn't it? And so embracing multilingualism for me, actually throughout my lifetime, both professional and beyond, before the professional life, I think my interest in multilingualism has always been about building bridges. And I think that's clearly what we're trying to do in events like this. Thank you. Over to Afzal Khan at the Houses of Parliament. Thanks again for joining us. You were one of the very first people to draw attention to multilingualism in Parliament. You took the oath of office in Urdu. You hosted events on multilingualism. You challenged the government about the need to provide information on COVID when the pandemic broke out in community languages. And you also represent one of the country's most multilingual constituencies. What do you believe are the challenges that your constituents face that are related to multilingualism?
Well, let me start by saying thank you to you, Professor, for the amazing work for the many, many years that you've been doing in this subject, and also for pulling us all together tonight. For me, someone who had been bilingual, multilingual almost from the start of my life, and this was almost like a norm. But then you experience this as you move forward, and then you realize the difficulties, the challenges that people actually face. As you said, I did take an oath in Urdu. And that actually just developed the idea. Only sort of a couple of hours before I actually took the oath. I was going to do the oath as routinely in English. And actually, what happens is you do it in English, but then you have a choice also to do that oath again. And I felt personally at the time that I thought that would be really nice sort of step, especially for my father. My father was part of British Indian Army, and I thought he'll really be really proud that his son was a member of parliament and in the parliament took the oath in Urdu. So this is how actually the oath happened. But what was interesting was the question you raised about the challenges. Now, when I put that oath on the social media, what was shocking for me was the amount of hate that I experienced. Majority of the people had no clue actually what this was all about, and they felt offended somehow. How dare do I take the oath in Urdu? Not understanding that in fact I had taken the oath in English first. And even if I hadn't, so what? What's wrong with that? And then one of my replies, I said, if it's good enough for Queen Victoria to learn and speak, it certainly is good enough for me to take the oath as well. But I got hundreds and hundreds of tweets by the racists picking this whole issue up. And then again, the issue of challenges. I realized with the COVID-19, and that there I was sitting in Parliament, the ministers coming in telling us how bad things were. And at the time, in early stages, you could see that the London was way ahead. And then I asked the question, what are you doing in different languages to get the message out, to make sure that everybody understands the importance of this and how it connects us all? Because if you leave one group out, and if they don't follow the rules properly, don't understand them, the importance of them properly, then we are all at risk. And I was shocked that actually the government was doing nothing about it. And in fact, a month later, I came back and had to challenge again, because at this time, London had sort of peaked. And to me, I thought, but don't you understand that London is also the most diverse? And therefore, there is this need of language, not only simply because of understanding. There's some 4 or 5 million who don't understand English, but it's also sometimes the message when you give it to their own mother tongue, it's actually easy to receive. And they find it acceptable better. So I just thought, whoa, how come? And then the excuse I got wasn't really good enough, but I won't waste the time here going more deep into that. But then you see that actually in there that there are challenges where both some elements who find it offensive, that you also find the government not really understanding the full benefits. How things can go forward. So you come across in my own constituency in Manchester, which is very diverse. There are people, who then struggle. And then when they do contact my office, and now I have an office where people do have skills in different languages, and therefore we can reach out to people in different languages. And that really helps them, and it helps us as well to understand what the problems are, and therefore help us in trying to help them and to bring about the right solutions which are required. So I just think ultimately with a city like Manchester, with Britain, when we say it's multilingual, multicultural, multi-faiths, then we've got to be embracing it and use it as a strength. And therefore, the world we are in now, look at the technology that we have. Here I am, somewhere else, another guest is another country, and some of you are there sitting, and yet we're communicating. So that means of communication have really improved, and therefore we need to be embracing.
Yeah, thank you. What was quite heartening, I think, also at the beginning of the pandemic was the contribution of local grassroots organizations to translation. And you had everything from the medical profession to
Right.
local community groups and local authorities embracing that. And we saw kind of communication online. And we'll come back to this point on policy, I hope, later, and the contribution of cities. But somehow cities seem to be, and this is a general theme, far ahead than national governments in recognizing the need. And on that note, Councillor Rahman, you're of Bangladeshi background, and Language Day is a Bangladeshi legacy. It's been celebrated in the Bangladeshi community worldwide long before it became, I guess, embraced by cities more generally. How do you feel about that development? What do the Language Day celebrations mean to you? But in particular, what is your vision for the mother tongues of the people of Manchester?
Thank you, Professor, for hosting this event, and thank you for inviting me on this panel. I think I'll follow on from where Afzal left off in terms of those challenges and those issues that he talked about. And of course, we know that there are challenges and issues around multilingualism and making sure that people have access to information, important information in a language that they can understand. But I see that as for me, being multilingual is where you left off. I see it as an opportunity and as a real advantage in terms of personal development, but also in terms of economic development, in terms of economic success, in terms of being able to reach out to the world. We live in a global planet. We can travel to any part of the world within a few hours. We can communicate, as Afzal said, online to people in multiple parts of the world, and having the ability to be able to speak in different languages gives us the opportunity to be able to really explore, to be able to really take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. And that's why when I initiated the Made in Manchester poem, it was about celebrating that importance of being multilingual, being able to speak more than one language, being able to celebrate the linguistic diversity that Manchester has, and having over 200 languages spoken here gives us that rich ability to be able to kind of explore and untap a huge amount of potential that this city has. And I think we need to be able to follow that. And the work that we're doing with Manchester City of Literature and the International Mother Language, Father Language Day events across this next week is really crucial in bringing about that importance of language. And of course, also, whilst we're recognizing the importance and the value of languages, also recognizing that we're losing languages at a pace that is unprecedented, and we need to be able to preserve those languages and keep doing events like this and kind of reinforcing that value of multilingualism, reinforcing the importance of language and why it's so important to use language to communicate, will help us in order to preserve some of those languages that we're losing across the world. So it's really important for me, and I think it's something that I am passionate about and I will continue to support. We are, before you ask me the question, have talked about a language strategy for the city. I think in terms of the city responding to languages, we've done quite well, but it's been done in a very ad hoc, responsive way, and having a strategy that incorporates all the work that we do and looks ahead to what we need to be doing more of to embrace the culture of multilingualism is something that I'm keen on and something that we're working on as a city.
Thank you. I'm hoping we'll still get back to the language strategy in a bit when we do the second round with a stronger focus perhaps on policy. I just wanted to say I keep insisting on the mother and father language because I think we need gender equality in general, and it applies to this. I mean, mother tongue, of course, underrates as well, apart from implying a particular confinement to the mothers, underrates and fails to recognize the contribution of fathers as well. I am a proud father who've passed on my language to my child, and there are many other fathers who do that as well. So maybe someday we don't want to challenge UNESCO, but we want to enrich the official UNESCO designation. Over to Maaike Verrips joining us from Amsterdam. I'm so tempted to say Les Pays-Bas, 12 points, but in a different format. Europe's nations are still very much defined by their national languages, usually one, sometimes two, with a couple of regional languages. It varies, but our cities are much more multilingual than the nations recognize, with languages numbering in the dozens or in the hundreds. Can you pick perhaps a couple of examples from work that you've been involved in over the years, activities that have helped raise awareness and confidence in multilingualism, particularly in cities? And tell us about them. We're not. You're on mute, I'm told.
It should be better now.
Oh, it's much better now. Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, well, before talking a little bit about, I think I can talk a little bit about the Dutch context and the activities we are involved in here. Yeah, I also want to thank you very much for all your work on Manchester, the language situation in Manchester. That has been very inspiring for us. And I have directed many people to your website and your research in the past, and hope to continue to do so. And I'm very happy to join this interesting event. I already heard some very interesting things that I didn't know. So, but having said that, yeah, I think it's maybe good to talk a little bit generally about one of my main projects of the past years, which is that we have organized a yearly language festival that was very much visited by both professionals and people interested in language, where people working on language, working with language, and we take it very broadly, right? We don't think only of interpreters or writers or journalists, but also, say, health professionals, psychologists, politicians, people whose job doesn't exist basically without language. So we've had this event yearly where a lot of people with that kind of background got together and were participating in quite a big program on the impact of language in many fields. And we've had a lot of interest there also from cities and from civil servants working in all kinds of municipalities. But basically what came out, and this is what has made us change our concept from a festival to a permanent online platform, but what came out was that multilingualism is really the topic of this day and age, I think, for many, many, many professionals. So it is a very important part in, like the MP already mentioned, it's very important when we have a crisis. It is where everybody needs to be informed. It's very important when we talk about integration, when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about international relationships. Today we had a webinar celebrating also this same day. We had a webinar in Dutch about multilingualism in education, and it's inequality in education is a very big topic, uneven opportunities. And again, there, language and multilingualism is a huge topic there. We had people from all over the world participating. So we noticed that for many, many professionals, multilingualism is a hugely important topic, and they want to find ways to deal with it. So for example, I thought it was very inspiring to hear about the poetry initiative from the library. In Amsterdam, for example, there is a different initiative, but from a similar idea. It's called the House of All Languages. It's part of the Amsterdam Library. It has, how do you call that? It has various locations, so the library is in different locations in the town, and the different locations has an edition of the House of All Languages. And again, there it is the connection with the community that the library seeks. So that is one thing, for example, that we have been involved in a little bit. Another example is, I think, a very good example from the Netherlands is the Zaanstad community, the municipality Zaanstad. It's not so far from Amsterdam, but it's a different town. They actually had a big social crisis a few years ago. It takes too far afield to explain all that, but it put the whole community in a bad, it gave a bad image to the whole community. And it was actually the start of completely new approach to integration in which multilingualism was embraced. So it led to the setting up of a joint approach by everybody who is involved in supporting parents and children and families, and setting up a joint common vision on how should we approach multilingualism. What should we advise parents? Should they speak Dutch to their children? Should they speak other languages? How can we support their multilingual identities? How important is it, etc. So, and it ended up with they published this mission statement, and they're now going to spread that across the country. But we noticed that there is a lot of energy amongst professionals in wanting to deal with this in a good and constructive way, rather than, as you say, I think we recognize that from the Netherlands as well, that the national policy and the national discourse basically about this topic is still rather nationalistic, and language is used very symbolically as a symbol of national Dutch traditional identity. Whereas at the level of cities and at the level of professionals, I think it sounds a bit similar to what I hear from you. There's a need and a desire to take the multilingualism as a starting point. And that's why, maybe as a final small point, that's why we changed this festival that I talked about before into a permanent online platform. So it's called Drongo Platform for Multilingualism. Drongo is a multilingual bird. And so we have a permanent platform where everybody can share their events, share their news, share new initiatives. Strike, for example, there are strikes now by the interpreters in court, so we pay attention to that. On the other hand, there's webinars like the one we had today, and so we're trying to put together that energy that goes into multilingual society, and I must say people are very enthusiastic about it, and it gives us all it lifts us all up basically. So.
Thank you. Well, we're touching already on an interface of several things. We've talked about cultural heritage and cultural creativity. We've talked about issues of policy, and we've touched on the issues of professional practice. And the professionals in the front line are the ones who are having to often respond and adjust and enrich their practices to a multilingual reality. I think another point that's coming up is how enriching these encounters are between cities and different places, and we can learn a lot about different initiatives and different strategies. So back to Becky. When I worked at the university, the team that I led did a lot of outreach, and we often encountered suspicion when we approached non-academic, as we call them in academia, stakeholders. It's a bit of a patronizing expression perhaps, but when we went out to the real world, there was sometimes suspicion that we encountered as if our engagement with multilingualism was intended to just benefit our research or help us market our degree courses. And it was very difficult to sometimes alleviate that benefit on initial encounter, at least. How should universities approach civic engagement in a way that can gain the confidence of non-academic audiences?
I think it's a very good question. I think quite rightly people are suspicious of university language, maybe. As you say, the use of the word stakeholders instead of people and community and residents. But I think it's changed. I think the outward-facing aspects of universities in Manchester are very committed to their civic responsibility. Whether that's through widening participation programs or student ambassadors who are language ambassadors who do great work in schools. Some of that is about encouraging young people to think about higher education, for sure. But I think it goes beyond that, particularly in a city where we're talking about the importance of celebrating languages. If you have a new project, which is to set up something, which is a public poetry library, you have to connect and speak kind of inwardly to your staff and students about how they might contribute, but actually you're outward facing. And I think what we've tried to do in the past 3 years, developing the library, is to say that we're a listening space, that you can talk to us about what kind of library you want us to create. Our vision, I guess, is that anybody in Manchester could come to that library and feel comfortable that they find themselves reflected on the shelves. And when I say on the shelves, it's beyond the space. It's also the events around International Mother Language Day, around the Festival of Libraries that we have in Manchester. And the universities are not on their own. They're part of Manchester City of Literature that Councillor Rahman mentioned. So we meet every fortnight. There are maybe 20, 30 partners, and we talk about how we'll work together. And where there are gaps for different language communities, we talk to each other about how we might meet them. So I think there's something about, I mentioned historical collections and museums and galleries looking at decolonizing. I think, again, what we're trying to do is to develop a place that you feel included in. I'm trying to avoid using the word inclusive too much because, again, it's a jargon word, but where people might feel that a place is for them.
Thank you. Well, inclusivity is a big word also in policy. Mm-hmm. If we go back to Afzal Khan in London in the Houses of Parliament, some of the traditional arguments to encourage language learning have been, in this country, the need to strengthen foreign trade, foreign relations, the need to strengthen security on the international arena. But we're also a multilingual society here at home. Where do you see priorities for a national language policy in terms of its domestic orientation?
I think the two examples that you have used, which have been so traditionally reasoning why we should learn, and that's why you find that those who are in the diplomatic fields, they give them those language skills, etc. But the truth is, where we are today in the world is completely different. And at the heart of this point now is the amount of the degree of connectivity and interdependence that we have of one another has been huge now. It's been going through the roof. The means we have to travel, the means through which we can communicate, all that has really meant that we are much more connected. And therefore, while these traditional reasonings are still valid, but some of these reasoning can be actually used even more. But there is also the inner side of looking at it, the inward-looking ideas that as a society, because of what has happened over these hundreds of years, the way the world is, how we have a society in Britain now. And that means to embrace this. And by embracing this, you've got to accept actually the idea that by our citizens having the skills of a benefit of being a polyglot, where they can speak so many different languages, that actually helps us to achieve that, those things that we talked about, but also here within the society. It in a way enriches us. It gives you an opportunity to have expression in that depth of it, even the emotional connection as well with those languages. And that also helps. And then I think that earlier on was touched on this point as well about the idea of community cohesion. If we make an effort of learning different languages, that means then we can use those languages for those different groups. And those groups then feel, I think, a lot of reassurance as well, a lot of comfort as well, and feel that they are also being valued. And that, I think, is also there, being appreciated and being valued, which is there as well. And for that to achieve, ultimately, I suppose, what we got to get to now is having better facilities, better resources. It's only through that we'll be able to achieve those facilities. Like in Manchester, we look at it. I was in charge of children's services. Lutfur Rahman has been doing a lot of good work here as well. And we have a number of schools who actually teach different languages, different cultural things and teachings which goes on there as well. Now, those schools, they need to be given proper resources. And I would go further and say, but we shouldn't have these sort of separate evening types of schools. In fact, they should be properly equipped within our own systems in schools. And therefore, what we need to be then thinking is, how do we take this forward further? How do we make sure some of our curriculums are also matching with that? How do we make sure at the parliament level that we even have an APPG, an all-party parliamentary group which specializes looking at this, so the parliamentarians from different parties can come together with a common interest of promoting this, and then, of course, influencing the political parties into their manifestos, and then ending up in a clear national strategy with proper resources, so that we are equipped. Because I think there's no question how important this is now, and how it helps us here within the society, and for us to be looking outward. Even considering Brexit idea, if that's the case, well, clearly we need to be now doing a lot more. I mean, personally, I'm very disappointed because I've experienced it even in the European Parliament, how amazingly they were able to use different languages, and instantly, the communication was taking place. So that sort of stuff, I think we need to be really getting better at if we want to be successful, the global Britain that current government talks about.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think one interesting takeaway from that is, can we expect to see draft language policies in party manifestos for the next election? Which brings us back to the city language strategy. Councillor Rahman, we've been working together on and off on this for several years. And what I found very inspiring and heartening is that the City Council's approach to a language strategy for Manchester was not that this should be a city council strategy that the council would impose, but a city language strategy where the city should work with partners to see who in the city is doing what for language and languages and multilingualism. And there's one policy paper that was already published by a committee some years ago, I think in late 2019. And of course, in the meantime, we've had the interruption with the pandemic and all sorts of other priorities. But coming back to that, what can we expect the language strategy to yield in the near future, or what kind of steps might the council still take to forward it?
I think to start off with, that recognition that any strategy, for it to be a workable strategy, has to be something that people develop, not something that's a top-down approach that the city council or government or any other authority says, this is what we think is good for you. It doesn't work. It has to be something that people buy into and people develop in partnership and collaboration. That's why it's a strategy for the city, and we'll be carrying on doing some work around that. I think one of the key points that I do want to touch on, and I think Afzal repeated the word resources on a number of occasions. And I think we've got to, until there's a recognition about the economic benefits of multilingualism, you're not going to see that reflected in political party manifesto, government policy, local authority policy. And I think that is where we need to, as a local authority, as a city of literature, city of languages, all of these different institutions and organizations that value the importance of languages have got to really make that connection between the economic benefits of being multilingual and of course the community cohesion and other societal benefits that it has. That, I think, will be a part of the strategy that we develop, really highlighting the opportunities that being able to speak multiple languages in a global economy allows you to do. We have left Europe, but we haven't. We're still part of Europe, and we're still traveling to Europe, and people are accessing opportunities across the world. We've got people that have shaped this city who have come from different parts of the world and have spoken different languages. And I think that's really important to be reflected in any city strategy that we have for languages. But for me, I think when we do develop that strategy, I've got to really kind of put a lot of emphasis on the possibilities and opportunities that being multilingual can unlock. And of course, Afzal spoke a little bit about the supplementary schools that we have. We have a huge offer in terms of supplementary schools. These are predominantly volunteer-based supplementary schools. Most of the people that are teaching there don't get paid, have to scrape pennies to be able to pay for venue hire and other resources that they need. That's not an acceptable situation to be in, knowing how valuable languages are. And mainstreaming multiple languages in our education system is key, is crucial. You know, the education policy that government develop, we don't have very much influence in terms of curriculum and education policy nationally, but we do have a voice, and we do make it very clear that multilingualism has got to be an integral part of the curriculum. Otherwise, you'll end up losing languages, as we spoke about earlier on, at the pace that we are losing them at. So the number of things that I think should be reflected in our policy, but of course there's a big role in lobbying and campaigning for that recognition.
Yeah. Sure, and of course we must critically address also this two-tier system and understanding that has existed in this country between what is often referred to in the education system as the study of modern languages versus the study of community languages. And community languages are the ones that you've addressed, heritage languages, and they're usually taught, as you said, by volunteers in non-mainstream education, although there are some examples that teach them in mainstream schools as well. And that inequality in terms of languages rests with I think, in that orientation of what do we need languages for, the foreign policy versus the domestic. I do just wonder, where would we have been with Welsh 40 years ago if people had asked strictly about the economic value of Welsh. And the Welsh government and the national government have done so much incredible work to forward and encourage learning and use of Welsh everywhere, and it wasn't strictly economical, but it builds the confidence. And that, of course, makes people take initiative and be active and have agency in whatever they're doing, including in the economic sphere. So sometimes the argument, I think, is a two-step one, but certainly there. Over to Mike again in Amsterdam, and still on the topic of cities. So at a time where we see national governments in many places trying to keep nations apart in a way by flagging differences and flagging boundaries, cities seem to all share this practical need to embrace multilingualism because it's a frontline issue that professionals, as you said before, are confronted with. How can we do more? What can we do to bring cities together around this topic?
Well, I think listening to these stories, some of it which is new to me, a lot of examples from the Netherlands come to my mind, also of other approaches, for example. So, for example, this whole discussion about the heritage language education. Of course, we have community schools as well. We have a similar situation where they are mostly run by volunteers and scraping together the means and very vulnerable to all kinds of situations. On the other hand, I noticed that, for example, this afternoon again, that there is also quite another approach to multilingualism on the rise in the Netherlands, where it is more about raising intercultural awareness. So it's not only multilingualism for the multilinguals, but it's multilingualism for everybody. And it is the awareness that other languages exist, that they are important, that they are interesting. It is the awareness that they are valuable, that children are allowed to speak their own language, for example, in the school in order to facilitate learning. Not actually teaching all the languages that are present in the school, but just allowing them and allowing children to use whatever they know in their own language to learn. I just mentioning that, it doesn't seem to be an answer to your question, I realize, but I think it is, because I think it shows that there are many different, say, priorities maybe, or accents that are put on the kinds of solutions that professionals are looking for in various places. And maybe because we have a slightly different culture and a slightly different history than Britain, our first solutions are maybe a bit different than the ones that you come up with. And so I think that if we could set up some kind of international exchange between cities, a forum, a place, a website, maybe a yearly or 2-yearly meeting where we can share these experiences and share the cities in the Netherlands that would be interested to participate in something like that. And one particular issue that we come across, I get a message that my internet is unstable. Do you hear me well?
We can hear you.
Okay. One particular issue that comes up here time and again, and I think that would be something that cities might collaborate on as well, is that we have so little data. And so sometimes we have, we always know the statistics on the nationalities in the cities, but we have no real idea of the languages spoken and the language needs. And I think you did a lot of work on that, for example, for Manchester. But there's a lot that cities can learn from each other there too, just to find the basis of what policy could be based on. So, yeah, I think a lot of what I heard today is inspiring for many people here too. And if we could find a way to exchange, to create a kind of exchange forum for that, I would be happy to.
So an international forum for exchange among multilingual cities, that's certainly something that City of Languages, I'm sure, would want to think about and talk to others about locally and internationally. Thank you all very much for your interventions, and I think we've had from different angles a very interesting pulling together in the same direction. It's not a coincidence, of course. We've invited people that we knew have something to say and are enthusiastic about multilingualism, but I found myself in the past 45 minutes thinking, what's the counter argument? And what if we had somebody here who's against multilingualism? And I think maybe for next year's event, we should organize and try and find something where we can have a bit of a debate, because what is the side that denies the importance of multilingualism, the importance of accommodating it, something for the future. In the meantime, though, I'd like to invite you, the panelists, first of all, if you have any questions or comments on each other's interventions, please.
Can I just pick that up a little bit, what you were just saying, Professor? And I was thinking while you were making that statement, in a sense, why would somebody have the objection? And the only thing that's hitting me back is my own experience. When I said that, I gave an oath in Urdu and that was in social media, and the response that got. And if I'm honest with you, frankly speaking, it's ignorance, nothing more than that.
Oops. We lost you there for a moment, Afzal. Hopefully he'll be back soon, but in the meantime.
One of the things I wanted to pick up on from Micah, Micah, you talked about the importance of education. And as Councillor Rahman says, I agree that it's very difficult to have impact on changes to curriculum. And when you work on projects, multilingual projects with communities and with teachers, you see the difference it makes. It's absolutely categorically about self-respect, respecting a part of somebody. You talked about agency, Yaron. If you are a student in a classroom that has 40 to 45 different languages, and you are not allowed to mention your language or refer to your language, it means that you're disconnected from a huge part of yourself that doesn't step into your education. So it does have a big impact on your confidence, your development of skills, your development of language skills. I think you wanted to come back on that, Micah.
Yeah, I just want to mention that like today, we are talking about it in terms of the benefits for education or the effects or the effectiveness of education in this multilingual setting. But we sometimes forget to mention that this is about human rights. It's a basic human right to use your language, and it's so we are by chance tomorrow has been declared, I don't know if everybody knows, Global Language Advocacy Day by a coalition called the Global Coalition for Language Rights, which Amnesty, for example, is part of, and a number of language organizations. But so on our platform, we have taken that as another reason to have another event tomorrow night. But I think it is actually important to take it a little bit more seriously. This whole thing about denying children the right even to speak their language on the school grounds, it is simply, a violation of their basic human rights. And by last year, the UN Committee on the, what's it called exactly? I'm sorry, Prevention of Racism or something like that. They had their research in the Netherlands last year, and they have actually condemned our country exactly for that reason, because we deny children. There are lots of schools where children are forbidden to speak their own language, with awful effects, like children telling their parents that they should not take them to school. Parents should not come to school because the children are so embarrassed if their parents try to speak Dutch, etc., etc. There's lots and lots of detrimental effects of that. Anyway, so the UN Commission condemned the Netherlands and ordered the Netherlands to set up a policy to change this reality. And so I think sometimes, we in the multilingualism field, we are sometimes maybe a little bit too nice, too sweet, too soft on it. It's a big political and also human rights issue that I think we should also highlight.
Well, in this country, to come back to the example of the Welsh Language Act, that was really about cultural rights and human rights initially, wasn't it? And got recognition. And in the meantime, of course, it does have all the other implications such as media, culture, economic activity, and so on. And people feel differently about immigrant languages of the past 50, 60 years because many people feel they don't really belong and they should assimilate. And one forgets, of course, that English started out as an immigrant language in this country in the 5th century, and a rather small one, in fact, back then. And it grew to where it is today as a result of particular historical events. But as everybody has said, in a globalized world, people have the resources and the opportunities to continue to maintain their languages across borders. We have a few minutes left, and I'd like to ask if there's any comment or questions from, I understand we can only take them from the audience that's present here in the room, or unless there were any via the social media. But I don't see that we do at the moment. We do, yes, lovely. So thank you. If you could just wait for the microphone. So we have, I think, exactly time for one question and reactions. Yeah.
I'm from Manchester Museum. I was particularly interested in what you were saying about the economic benefits has to be recognised first, and I like the fact that Jan had said about how actually valuing a language and how it can create community cohesion, which in a sense then it becomes valued, can then bring about confidence in our community members to then perhaps aspire to do great things, and then the economic side comes along. So I think the two of them do go, they're very hand in hand. And I was just thinking about the curriculum and bringing it into the curriculum, and within the city of Manchester itself is looking at the demographics of our city, and I think it's about 60%, 70% of our demographics are of South Asian heritage, and yet they're I don't think there are many schools, or maybe the one odd one that actually teach Urdu, Punjabi, and it's, you know, what can we do, or how can perhaps we use our cultural assets and places of learning from language? I mean, I'm hoping we can do things at Manchester Museum, like provision there, but, you know, we've got a rich city of cultural institutions that become as places for supplementary schools as well.
Just before I allow our panelists to respond to that, I mean, just on the demographics. So around 17% declared on the last census, which was 10 years ago, that they had a main language other than English. We as researchers believe that number is very much underreported. But we know that among young people in the city, those who are attending schools at various levels, at least 40% are multilingual and have another language at home. So that tells you something also about the direction of the demographics. But please, who would like to comment on Wendy's question?
Yeah, I think we are, the point I was making earlier on, that we are kind of providing that provision through supplementary schools, through our cultural institutions, through external kind of organizations rather than the mainstream. And what I'd like to see more of is that the mainstream embracing languages and teaching those languages. The school population in some schools, in some parts of Manchester, nearly 90% of the population is of South Asian heritage. So their language is either Urdu, Punjabi, Bengali, Hindi, or one of those regional dialects. Yet those languages are not being taught in the mainstream schools, and that's where we need to get to. Of course, in the meantime, in the absence of government policy and resources, we're picking up that space, that vacuum, through our supplementary schools and through cultural institutions and other volunteer groups. But, you know, in the long term, it's not a sustainable model, and it's a model that it will crack at some point, because, you know, what you see now, the fourth, fifth generation of migrant families who speak another language apart from English, that language, that mother language, is diminishing. In my house, I got 4 kids, 2 of them struggle a lot to put a sentence together in Bengali. So that's disappearing. I can speak Bengali, but I can't read or write in Bengali. So even from my generation, it kind of weakened. And I think that goes back to your point about the Welsh argument. I think and it kind of takes us back to Bangladesh, where the language movement started off from, where it was declared as Urdu as the main language. It would have, if people stop speaking the language, eventually it will just erode, like we are losing languages equally. Wales being part of the United Kingdom and English being the predominant language, if they don't refresh and keep speaking the Welsh language, it will in time disappear. And I think the Welsh government recognise that. So that's not the economic argument, that's more about the preservation element of it. But the reason I talked about the economic argument is what I see as a local politician is, for any government to do anything, there's got to be an economic case to be made for them to respond to any issue. And sometimes you want to not think about the economics and think about the community cohesion, the preservation of languages, the importance, the value, all of that. But unless there's an economic twist to it, you don't see the inaction from national government, local government, whatever you're talking about.
I think from Wendy's question, I think data on the impact of projects, whether they're originating from schools or whether they're originating from cultural organisations in the city, do need to be carefully designed. We talked about the civic responsibility of universities. That's perhaps one way we could help in terms of research that's practice-based, that then leads to changes in education. If you think about projects across cultural institutions in Manchester and the idea of having 3 multilingual poets, the interest is there. We run a multilingual competition every year, and we had 72 different languages. And those South Asian languages, Bengali, Punjabi, the Mirpuri languages, were incredibly well, part of that group. We had something like 2,600 entries from 8 to 18-year-olds, and part of the other tongue competition is to provide a poem or story in your mother tongue, or father tongue, mother and father tongue, and then write a piece about why it's important to you. And then, if you want to, you can write a poem in a language that you're learning. So whether that's French, German, Urdu. So the interest is there. I think if schools were to foreground languages more, I think they would find the engagement of students would be greater than they imagine, I think.
Question for you, Professor. Yeah. The mother language term, is that referring to the mother, or is it referring to the country as the mother?
I never thought about that, actually. But even so, then there's also, in some languages like German, you actually say Vaterland, not Mutterland, so fatherland and not motherland. So I don't know. That's I have to investigate that. Maybe I'll publish an article about it when I find the answer. I think that the mother tongue refers to the mothers as being the main caretakers at infancy. And I think that's one reason that we should be a bit critical toward that, because I want to see those roles shared. I saw them shared in my own household. And also we forget that there are multilingual households where the mother speaks one language, the father speaks another language. And we don't want to, discriminate one over the other and so on, even symbolically, even just implicitly. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you all so much. We are out of time. I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to say that I'm really, really proud to see how these discussions have evolved in this city. I've been doing this for something like 10 years, involved in multilingualism in Manchester, and so much has happened with so many organizations, stakeholders, institutions, the council, and others taking this on board. And whether, and I have to be honest now today, whether Manchester really has the highest density of languages in the country or in Europe, that remains to be proven, or let's say disproven. But it doesn't really matter, because this city has embraced its language diversity as its emblem of identity, and that's something rather exceptional, and it's something absolutely fantastic. So thank you again for joining us. I'd like to extend a very, very warm thank you to City of Literature, who have made this event possible, and indeed the whole several weeks of wonderful events that are going on in Manchester, but most of them are online, so you can join from anywhere in the world that has a connection. So go to the Manchester City of Literature website, International Mother Language Day in Manchester 2022, and you'll find a whole range of different activities, from culture to research to film to poetry, from communities and other institutions to attend and find inspiration from. Thank you also to our technical team for making all of this possible in this hybrid and interesting and exciting format. Good night.